Welcome to Her Silent Cry, a place where the forgotten voices of women from the past finally find the silence they were denied. Here, we tell the untold stories of hardship, injustice, and quiet resilience, stories that history often left behind. Each night, we invite you to listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. So now, take a deep breath, close your eyes if you'd like, and let us guide you through the life of a woman whose pain once echoed in silence. Tonight's story begins like a whisper, faint, distant, but heavy with truth. Are you ready? Let us begin. The story is called Victorian Era Prostitutes in America, when sex was survival. She was 17 when she first walked into the brothel. The silk curtains didn't hide the stench of gin, smoke, and desperation. Her corset was too tight, her makeup too thick, and her smile too practiced. But what choice did she have? In 1884, New York, there were only 3 ways a woman without a man could survive: sew for pennies, clean for hunger, or sell herself for shelter. They were not just fallen women, they were survivors. They were immigrants, orphans, widows, women who the world had failed. In the Victorian era, morality was weaponized, while society praised purity and virtue. Thousands of women were left to fend for themselves in a brutal economy that paid them less than a loaf of bread a day. They didn't choose prostitution because they wanted to. They chose it because it was that or die. In this episode, we step inside the hidden world of 19th century American brothels. Not the glamorized myths, but the real, raw, silent cries behind the closed doors. We'll follow the life of one composite character, Mary, a symbol of countless women who lived, loved, and suffered in silence. This isn't just about sex, it's about power and the price women paid to survive. In the late 19th century, America was wearing a corset, tight, suffocating, rigid. It cinched not just the waist, but the mind. The Victorian era promised order, civility, virtue, but beneath the lace and prayer books, there was rot. Let's now go back to the 1870s, a time when the streets of cities like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco pulsed with ambition and filth. The Industrial Revolution had lit up skylines. Factories churned smoke into the air. Railroads clawed through the wilderness, and wealth piled high for the powerful few. But underneath that gilded surface, women, especially the poor, the foreign-born, the orphaned, were drowning in silence. Women had no vote, no right to own property once married, no legal guardianship over their children. Their virtue was currency, and once spent, society marked them for life. A good woman belonged in the parlor, a bad one in the gutter. But reality was rarely so cleanly divided. The Victorian image of the ideal woman was everywhere: pale, submissive, fragile, protected by a strong male provider. Novels, sermons, political speeches all repeated the same narrative. A woman's place is in the home, but for tens of thousands of women, there was no home. Imagine a 16-year-old girl whose father died in a mining accident, whose mother was sick, whose brothers had gone west or to war and never returned. Imagine an immigrant girl just off the boat from Ireland or Italy, speaking broken English, holding nothing but a church address in her pocket. These girls were flooding into urban slums, only to find out that America the Beautiful was not for them. They found tenement housing, 6 people in one room, leaking roofs, tuberculosis in the air. Work, yes, if you were lucky, but sewing shirts for 12 hours a day might earn you $2 a week, just enough for bread, not enough for rent. And if you were too slow or sick, you were gone. It was a world built for men and for the wealthy. Women were told to be chaste, obedient, silent, but were given no tools to survive. And so, slowly, painfully, they turned to the one thing they still owned in full: their bodies. It didn't happen all at once. Some girls started out boarding with older men in exchange for food. Others met women who took them into mysterious houses with warm meals, silk robes, and no chores, but soon found out the cost. Still others, too desperate to care, stepped onto dark corners and let the night swallow them whole. We were taught that selling our bodies was sin, but no one mentioned that starving was too. From an anonymous letter found in a 19th century New York archive, brothels, ironically, were safer than the streets. Many were run by women, madams, who had once been prostitutes themselves. Some madams offered protection, clothing, even a cut of the profits. Others exploited the girls just like any pimp would, but in a society that gave women no wages, no rights, no safety nets. The brothel was not always a fall. It was a refuge. The irony was impossible to miss, and yet no one talked about it. The same men who preached about family values and female modesty during the day would frequent brothels at night. Judges, police officers, preachers, journalists, businessmen. Many were regulars, their faces so familiar that girls learned their moods, their secrets, their fetishes. Some would leave calling cards. Others offered gifts. Many offered nothing but violence. And when those same men saw these women on the streets in daylight, they looked away. Or worse, they spat. We were useful in the dark and disgusting in the light. Former prostitute. Testimony from 1888. Chicago Reform Hearing. Society created a double standard, so wide it swallowed truth itself. A man's pleasure was his right. A woman's pleasure was her sin. A man's mistake was forgivable. A woman's survival was shameful. It was not sex that society punished. It was female independence. Some women managed to stay within the lines of respectable poverty. They scrubbed floors in rich homes, sewed until their fingers bled, or took in laundry from 10 families just to survive. But even those women walked the edge of ruin every day. A single illness could cost a job. A sick child could make rent impossible. An unwanted pregnancy, and remember, birth control was nearly non-existent, could destroy everything. And once a woman crossed that line into sex work, there was no coming back. Employers refused to hire her. Churches shunned her. Family disowned her. And if she was arrested, and many were, her name would be published in local papers under disorderly conduct. Even if she escaped the brothel, her life became a permanent exile. One of the most cruel aspects of Victorian America was its insistence that these women didn't exist. They were everywhere, in alleyways, behind red curtains, on the edge of every city block. But they were not spoken of. Newspapers used coded terms like fallen women or ladies of the night. Churches whispered prayers for wayward souls, but rarely looked them in the eye. Reformers, mostly upper class women, tried to rescue prostitutes, but often treated them like broken dolls, not human beings. They wanted to save us, but not listen to us. These women left few written records because they were not taught to write or too afraid to. Their voices have been largely lost, buried under shame, censorship, or simply ignored by historians. But if you listen close, you can still hear them in court transcripts, in anonymous letters, in medical reports, in the backs of arrest logs. They lived, they suffered, they endured. It's important not to romanticize pain, but it's just as wrong to strip these women of their complexity. Many had friendships, created rituals of self-care with what little they had. Some fell in love with clients. Some supported sisters or children in secret. Some wrote poetry. Some dreamed of escaping. And a few did. And despite the filth, the fear, the shame, they remained deeply human, more than the labels given to them. I was not a saint, but I was a daughter, a friend, and once a girl who danced in the rain. Line from fictionalized memoir, The House on Bleecker Street. Victorian America told women to be pure, but it gave them no clean place to stand. And so, they made choices, impossible ones, in order to keep breathing. They were not fallen, they were pushed. Her name was Mary, but she could have been Nora, or Rosa, or Annie. She stands for thousands. One story, sewn from fragments of many real lives, gathered from the shadows of Victorian America. Mary O'Connell was born in 1867 in 5 Points, New York, a neighborhood known for its narrow streets, its drinking houses, and its brutal poverty. Her parents were Irish immigrants, part of the wave that had fled famine only to find new suffering in the land of opportunity. Her father, Thomas, worked in a match factory. Long hours, toxic fumes, no protections. Mary remembered the day he died. A fire broke out in the building. There were no exits on the upper floor, no fire escape. She was only 9, but the smell of ash would never leave her. Her mother, Catherine, tried to keep the family afloat, cleaning houses, mending clothes, but her lungs had been damaged from the tenement's mold. She coughed blood every winter, and by the time Mary was 15, Catherine could barely stand. Mary had soft brown eyes and dark curls she tried to keep pinned up, though loose strands always escaped. She had calloused hands, crooked fingers from sewing too fast, and skin chapped from cold water and bleach. She took any job she could, mending socks, washing floors, delivering linens in snowstorms with no boots. Her best week earned her $1.15, half of which went to rent, the other half to bread and kerosene. She stopped going to school, stopped dreaming, stopped smiling. When her mother died in early spring of 1883, Mary stood outside the tenement house, holding a candle and staring at the sky, not crying, just empty. There were no relatives, no friends with room, no charities with open beds. She tried to stay in the same room, but within days, the landlord, a greasy man named Mr. Finch, came knocking. Girls alone pay extra, he said, or pay another way. Mary ran. She found herself walking uptown, hoping someone might need a maid or laundry girl, but doors closed in her face. People looked through her like she didn't exist, or, worse, like she wasn't worth existing. She slept 3 nights in an alley near Mulberry Street, wrapped in rags and newspapers. A grocer threw her a bruised apple. A drunk man tried to crawl on top of her while she was sleeping. She kicked him hard and fled. On the 4th night, she was shivering behind a tavern when a woman approached her, elegant, older, wearing velvet gloves and a feathered hat. Her name was Miss Eleanor, and she spoke with a calm, almost motherly voice. "You don't belong out here, child. What's your name?" Mary didn't answer at first, but Eleanor handed her a warm bun wrapped in cloth. "There's a place you can stay, clean bed, hot soup, if you're willing." Mary knew what she meant, not in words, but in the way she said, "if you're willing." She didn't ask about the rules. She didn't ask about the price. She was too tired. And so that night, Mary walked into her first brothel. The house didn't look dangerous. It was painted soft green, with curtains and candles in the windows. The parlor smelled of lavender and tobacco. Women lounged in silk robes, their faces powdered and lips painted red. Mary felt like a ghost, quiet, small, invisible. Miss Eleanor led her to a back room. There was a clean dress laid out on the bed, a bowl of warm water, a cracked mirror. "Clean yourself up," Eleanor said. "They like them fresh." That night, Mary served tea to a man in a top hat. She smiled and poured and said nothing. Later, another girl whispered to her, "Don't speak unless he asks. Don't drink the gin, and don't cry. Not till he's gone." He was old. His breath smelled of cloves and cigars. He touched her hair like it was a piece of fabric, not part of a person. She didn't remember most of it, only that she bled a little, and that she didn't scream. The next morning, Eleanor handed her $3 and said, "Not bad. You'll do fine." Mary learned fast. She learned how to paint her face, how to laugh at jokes that made her sick, how to spot the ones who wanted to hurt you, how to pretend it felt good. There were rules. Never bite the clients. Don't tell them your real name. Don't get attached. And never go with a man who refuses to take his boots off. Those were the ones who meant trouble. Some girls lasted months. Some disappeared after a week. One girl named Josephine slit her wrists in the washroom after a railroad baron beat her half to death. Another named Lottie got pregnant and was sent to a special doctor. She never came back. Mary stopped asking questions. By the end of her 2nd month, she had a drawer full of letters she'd written to no one, just scraps of thoughts. "I miss stars. I used to sing while I swept. I remember snow, tasting clean." She never mailed them, but writing made her feel like she still existed. One evening, Mary met a man named Daniel, a younger client, quiet, nervous, kind. He paid just to talk at first. Then he asked if he could read to her from a poetry book. She said yes. He returned twice a week for a month. He brought pastries. He told her about his mother in Boston and how he used to paint. One night, he kissed her, just kissed, and said, "You shouldn't be here." Mary let herself hope. Maybe he'd take her away. Maybe she could be someone else. But he stopped coming. Later, she overheard that he'd been sent west to manage railways. He hadn't said goodbye. She never let herself hope again. Mary was 17 when she saw her first dead girl. She had been named Francesca, though most called her Frankie. She was from Italy. She coughed all winter, worked through fever, and then simply didn't wake up one morning. They wrapped her in a sheet and carried her out the back. No funeral, no family, just gone. By then, Mary had already started coughing herself. The madam gave her syrup laced with laudanum and told her to keep smiling. And she did, because she had no choice, because there was no path home, no home, just more nights, more men, more darkness. Mary's descent didn't come from sin. It came from hunger, from silence, from a world that saw her suffering and turned away. She was not a tragedy. She was a girl. Mary was no longer on the streets, but she was never far from them. Inside the brothel, the walls were warm, the beds were soft, but the chains were invisible. Mary now lived in what people discreetly referred to as a parlor house. From the outside, it was an ordinary townhouse on Broome Street. Respectable, with white curtains, brass door knockers, and a red ribbon tied discreetly on the rail to signal it was open for evening visitors. Inside, it was a different world. Velvet wallpaper, mahogany furniture, gin served in crystal glasses, and always music, a sad violin or a piano man who never made eye contact with the girls. The madam, Miss Eleanor, ran the house with cold efficiency. She called the women her angels, but Mary knew better. They were inventory, measured by the week, ranked by client. Each girl had a number, a list of preferences, and a growing record kept in a leather-bound book in Eleanor's locked drawer. Every evening began the same: a long bath in cold water, a powdered face, rouged cheeks, corsets tightened until ribs ached, perfume dabbed on bruises to hide the sour scent of fear. Mary's hair was always curled, two soft ringlets over each shoulder, because men liked it childlike. She wore satin, pink or lilac, with lace that scratched. Each night, they waited in the parlor while clients arrived. Men of all types, rich merchants, bankers, married politicians, out-of-town drifters with gold in their pockets, even sometimes the officers who were supposed to shut them down. They came smiling, polite, some even brought gifts, but none of them looked Mary in the eyes for more than a second. Mary tried not to remember them. But some men stayed in her mind, like oil on skin. There was Mr. Bartley, a judge from uptown, who liked to tie girls up and make them cry before he'd pay. He tipped generously, and that meant silence from Eleanor. There was the widower, who never spoke, only stared at her hands and wept into his whiskey. There was the preacher, who asked her to confess her sins, and then created new ones every Thursday at midnight. And there was the boy, no older than Mary, who had never touched a woman. He trembled when he kissed her. She whispered, "It's okay," and for a second almost believed it. She never saw him again. Despite the daily horrors, The women built something fragile between them, a kind of sisterhood born of necessity. There was Clara, who had once been a pianist but lost her fingers to frostbite before Eleanor found her. Now, she just hummed tunes as she brushed the girl's hair. Josie, bold and funny, would slip extra bread to the hungriest and spit in the gin of men who were cruel. And Lily, the youngest, barely 14 when she arrived from the orphan train, Mary took to her like a sister, combing her hair. At night, tucking lavender under her pillow, teaching her how to say no without saying the word. They protected each other in quiet ways. A look, a knock on the wall, a silent warning. Because they all knew Eleanor wouldn't save them, only they could. The brothel had rules, written and unwritten. Some made sense, others only served to break the spirit. No falling in love. That was the first. If you did, and the man stopped coming, you worked with a cracked heart, and no one could afford broken things. No drugs without permission. Laudanum and morphine were tools, not comforts. Too much, and you'd slip. Slipping meant being sold to the cheaper houses down by the docks. No illness. If you got sick, you were hidden. Clients didn't want reminders that women could bleed from something other than pleasure. Mary once saw a girl with tuberculosis dragged down the stairs by two men in coats. No one spoke of her again. No babies. If you missed a month, you were sent to the clinic. Some girls came back hollow. Others didn't return at all. Mary lived with constant fear in her gut. The fear of losing favor, of being deemed used up, of being replaced by the next girl off the train. Still, somehow, there were glimmers of humanity. One snowy evening, a client, an elderly man with ink-stained fingers, asked Mary what book she liked most as a child. She said Jane Eyre. He nodded and returned the next week with a worn copy, pages falling out, wrapped in string. He didn't ask to touch her, just sat and listened as she read a chapter aloud. It didn't change her life, but it reminded her she was still human. Another time, Lily got a fever and collapsed mid-shift. Mary locked the door, forced Eleanor to bring a doctor, and stayed by Lily's side for 3 nights, holding her hand through tremors. Lily survived, and after that, she started calling Mary Sis. Not all brothel keepers were like Eleanor. Some were crueler. Whispers came from the docks of chain houses, where girls were beaten if they refused clients, and fed only once a day. In one rival house nearby, a girl named Esther tried to escape through a second-story window. She fell, broke both legs, and was dragged back inside. When police were called, they laughed. One officer said, if she didn't want it, she shouldn't have dressed for it. Mary kept her head down, but part of her began to burn, not with fear, but with a quiet, growing rage. In late spring of 1885, a reformist woman named Emma Lathrop came to the brothel disguised as a client. She wore men's clothes, short hair tucked under a cap. When she was alone with Mary, she whispered, you don't belong here. We're building shelters, safe houses, places to get clean. Get out. Mary didn't believe her, but Emma left a note under Mary's pillow with an address in Greenwich Village. It stayed in her drawer for weeks, until one night Clara collapsed from bleeding. Eleanor said, "She's done. Take her to the alley." Mary refused. That night, while Eleanor slept, she and Josie smuggled Clara out the back in a laundry cart. They left her on Emma's doorstep. Mary never knew what became of her, but the next day, for the first time in 2 years, she smiled. Inside, the parlor, pain wore perfume. Laughter hid bruises. Names changed, but suffering stayed. And yet, inside that darkness, women carved spaces of survival, of love, of resistance. Mary didn't fear the law because the law didn't protect her. It fed on her, watched her, and sometimes wore her scent home. In the late 1800s, prostitution in America was illegal, but only when it was convenient. Cities like New York, Boston, and San Francisco pretended to fight it. Raids, arrests, and moral crusades filled the newspapers. But behind closed doors, the very men tasked with cleaning up the streets were clients themselves. Judges came to Mary's brothel, police captains took bribes, city inspectors accepted gifts to look the other way. One man even paid Eleanor $10 a week to not shut her place down, in exchange for access to whichever girl he wanted, free of charge. It was a system built on quiet exchanges, unspoken debts, and power wrapped in politeness. And Mary? She was both prisoner and product. Once, Eleanor forgot to pay off a new beat cop. He stormed in on a Tuesday night, dragging Lily, now 15, by the wrist. He shouted about public indecency, pulled open drawers, knocked over gin bottles. Mary stood frozen, heart pounding, as Eleanor calmly handed him an envelope. 5 minutes later, he apologized to himself and left. The next night, the girls were told to wear extra rouge and smile wider because business was back. That same week, a woman from a nearby tenement, a laundress with 3 children, was arrested for soliciting just because she lingered too long on a corner at dusk. She spent 6 months in Blackwell's Island prison. Her children disappeared into the orphan system. Mary read the story in the paper, her hands shaking. Why her and not me? Eleanor had the answer. Because you pay, and she doesn't. Mary learned quickly that cops weren't her protectors. They were just another kind of predator. Some demanded favors to keep the house open. Others made side deals, pushing new girls into brothels and taking a cut from the madams. In New York's Tenderloin district, it was known as the protected trade. Officers even assigned territories to brothels, unofficial zones where they wouldn't interfere, so long as bribes came on time. There were whispered stories of girls caught on the street, arrested by plainclothes officers, and then sold to brothels instead of processed. Mary didn't want to believe it until she met Annabelle, a girl who arrived one night bruised, crying, and barefoot. She told Mary that a cop had rescued her from a beating, then handed her to Eleanor for $20. She was 13. When cases did go to court, justice had a price tag. In 1887, a woman named Daisy Larkin, another girl from a rival house, accused a prominent banker of rape. She had bruises, witnesses, and even the banker's cufflink torn from his coat. The case made headlines. The judge called her a known whore, unfit to testify. The banker's wife sat in the gallery, pale and silent. In the end, the charges were dropped. Daisy was fined for public slander. She disappeared weeks later. Mary remembered the trial because Eleanor made all the girls read the newspaper aloud that morning. It was a warning. Don't forget who wins in the daylight. The church preached redemption, but often offered little more than shame. Missionaries would walk the red light districts in full black garb, handing out pamphlets with titles like The Fallen Woman's Last Hope and Repent or Rot. Some tried to help, building small shelters, offering tea and beds, but only to women who agreed to strict rules. No speaking of past sins, no contact with former associates, mandatory prayer, confession, and labor. Mary once visited a mission house. She was cold, hungry, and had nowhere to go after a fight with Eleanor. The woman at the door looked at her torn dress and said, "We don't take whores who smell of gin." Mary turned back into the snow, barefoot. She never returned. Eleanor, for all her cruelty, was smart. She understood the system and how to play it. She attended charity balls, donated to alderman campaigns, and gave discreet companionship to men in power. She used these connections to protect herself and her house, but never her girls. Once, Mary begged her to intervene when a client hit Lily so hard her eyes swelled shut. Eleanor said, "Do you know how many men want what you have? Smile and shut your mouth." But when a rival madam opened a house 2 blocks away, Eleanor called in favors, sent forged letters to the sanitation department, and within a week, that house was raided and burned down. The lesson was clear. Power protects power, but the women in the rooms, they were disposable. Newspapers in the Victorian era loved stories of fallen women, but only when they were tragic, titillating, or ironic. One headline read, "Murder in the Bordello, Pretty Prostitute, Found in Pool of Perfume and Blood." Another, "Sunday School Girl Turns Scarlet Jezebel." These stories sold papers, but rarely investigated the truth. They painted the girls as cautionary tales, not victims, as warnings, not human beings. When a brothel girl died, the report focused on what color corset she wore, not the man who broke her neck. Even when Mary's friend Clara died from complications after a forced abortion, the Herald only gave her 5 lines on page 9. A woman of no known relatives, found dead in a lodging house. Not all hope was lost. By the late 1880s, reformers, often women themselves, began fighting back. They weren't saints. They were angry, determined, tired of funerals. Women like Josephine Shaw Lowell and Maud Nathan began tracking corruption, exposing judges, and creating safe houses that didn't require confession or shame. They lobbied for labor laws, fought child prostitution, and they listened. Some even infiltrated brothels, like Emma did. They brought food, clean sheets, and sometimes, like in Mary's case, a way out. These reformers weren't perfect. Some were classist or religious zealots, but they cracked the door open, and some girls, like Mary, ran through it. It happened quietly. One night, Eleanor left town to attend a dinner with the mayor's cousin. The house was quieter than usual. Josie faked a stomach illness. Lily knocked twice on the third-floor wall. The signal was clear. Now, Mary packed nothing, only the note Emma had given her. They slipped out the back, through snow and ash, boots soaking through to skin. They ran until dawn, to the house in Greenwich Village, with a painted white door and a candle in the window. Emma opened it. No questions, no judgment, just a blanket, a basin of water, and for the first time, silence. Justice wasn't blind. It was cruel, selective, and bought with favors. But even in a world of sold bodies and shattered laws, some women still found a way to reclaim their voice, even if it had to be whispered first. Freedom doesn't begin with escape. It begins with healing and the long silence afterward. Mary had escaped, but she wasn't free. Not yet. Emma's shelter in Greenwich Village wasn't a haven of miracles. It was a worn brownstone with creaky stairs and a broken furnace. But it was honest. There were 6 other women living there, all different, all quiet. Josie barely spoke for the first 2 weeks. Lily cried every night, clutching her bruised arm. And Mary? She didn't know who she was anymore. They were fed hot soup, given simple tasks like sewing or laundry to reclaim routine. Emma offered books, not Bibles, and when Mary asked for silence, Emma gave it. One day, Mary found a journal by her bedside. On the first page, in Emma's handwriting, was a single sentence: "You are not your survival." Though Mary was out, the world hadn't changed. When she walked the street in a clean dress, men still stared. Some recognized her. Some thought they did. They whispered "whore" beneath their breath. One day in a bakery, a woman behind her hissed, "They let anything out of those houses now." Mary clenched the coins in her hand until her palm bled. Reformers like Emma worked hard to shield the women from shame. But society wasn't ready to see former prostitutes as anything more than broken things. Even when they tried to work as seamstresses, shop girls, or washerwomen, many were turned away. One employer said bluntly, "Once you've lain down for coin, you don't belong behind my counter." Mary was lucky. Emma found her work with a printer's wife who needed help binding books. It paid little, but for the first time, Mary came home with sore fingers instead of bruises. Not all wounds healed. Mary often woke screaming. The walls still felt too close. The scent of cheap cologne could freeze her mid-step. She feared windows, feared loud footsteps, feared the idea that Eleanor might one day come looking. But the worst part wasn't fear. It was guilt. She couldn't stop seeing Clara's eyes before she died, couldn't forgive herself for not helping Annabel escape sooner. She remembered the way Josie flinched at kindness, the way Lily avoided mirrors. Mary wrote pages in her journal, but tore most of them out. The words felt like poison, until one day they didn't. It began with letters. Emma encouraged the girls to write about their past, anonymously, and send them to women's reform clubs under false names. Some were read aloud in meetings. Others were reprinted in newsletters or advocacy journals. Mary signed her first letter M. It was raw, painful, unfiltered. She wrote about her first client, about Eleanor's cold voice, about the cop who sold Annabel. She expected silence, but weeks later she received a reply, a handwritten note from a woman in Boston who had read her letter aloud at a suffragist gathering. It said, "We are listening. You are not forgotten." That night, Mary cried, not from pain, but from the sudden, terrifying realization that she still mattered. Mary began to volunteer. She accompanied Emma to meetings of the New York Women's Protective League, speaking softly, rarely looking anyone in the eye. She didn't tell them her full story. Not yet. But when asked why she was there, she said, "Because girls like me never had a before, only a during, and maybe now, a little after." She helped prepare meals, sorted clothes, wrote letters to lawmakers under Emma's guidance, and slowly, her voice, once sold, silenced, and stolen, became part of something bigger. By the 1890s, public pressure was building. Women reformers, backed by journalists, began exposing the entanglement of police and prostitution in city after city. Newspapers ran articles with headlines like, "Corruption in the Vice Squad. Who really runs the Tenderloin? Girls sold by badge and gavel." More importantly, women voters, as suffrage movements gained momentum, began demanding change. New York passed laws limiting brothel territories. Mandatory minimum age laws for sex work were enforced, no longer ignored. Shelters like Emma's received funding, protection, and, slowly, respect. Mary watched from the edges. She didn't want glory. She just wanted fewer Claras, fewer Annabelles, fewer hers. Years passed. Mary remained at the shelter longer than most. She took over managing it when Emma grew ill. One day, she received a letter. It was from Lily, now working as a nurse's assistant in Buffalo. It read, "I tell them I'm a widow, but in truth, I'm a woman who survived Eleanor's house. You taught me that surviving is enough. I love you, Em." Mary folded the letter and placed it inside her journal. Then, with trembling fingers, she turned to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, "My name is Mary Cartwright. I was a prostitute, and I am not ashamed." Mary died in 1912, before the Great War. Her grave was small, unmarked for years. But in 1935, a former shelter girl, now a teacher in Boston, returned and had a headstone placed. It read, "Mary Cartwright." She was one of the first who stayed free. Most of history forgot girls like Mary. Their names weren't carved into books or monuments, but their echoes shaped everything: the fight for women's labor rights, the shelter systems of the 20th century, the very idea that a woman can be more than her past. Mary didn't live to see the suffrage movement win, or the formation of Planned Parenthood, or the decriminalization debates of the late 20th century. But every time a woman walked into a shelter and found safety, or wrote down her story without fear, Mary was there. Mary's story is not rare. It is simply one of the few that survived long enough to be heard. And if we are wise, we will keep listening. If Mary's story moved you, don't let it end here. There are still voices silenced by shame, survival, and injustice. Help us tell their stories. Subscribe to her silent cry for more forgotten truths, more women who deserve to be remembered, not erased. Like, subscribe, share their names. Their lives mattered.